Take one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Studio Rat HQ podcast. My name is Stephen Couch, and I'm here with Richard Kaplan and Derek Jablonski, my co-hosts.
How you doing?
Hey.
Hey, everybody. We are a group of audio engineers and musicians, record producers, music producers, and we discuss records made at various time periods, and most of them were made at Richard Kaplan's recording studio called Indigo Ranch.
Yeah, we are exploring 35 years of gold and platinum albums with the man who helped create them.
That would be Richard Kaplan, of
That's
course.
Richard.
So,
Thank you.
I've worked with Richard for years now, and Derek's been working with us as well. So that's part of the reason this whole thing came about was outside interest into how these records were made.
Oh, yeah.
And today, the record we're going to discuss is from the 80s by an artist called Morris Day, who you might know from a group called Morris Day and the Time. And also he had a close association with Prince. He and Prince started together. He recorded for Prince, helped write music, helped program, and things like that. But today we're going to talk about his record called The Color of Success. I've got some notes here. It was released in 1985. It did really well. It was number 37 on the Billboard Top 200
Wow, yeah.
and number 7 on the top R&B hip-hop albums. It also had a number 3 credit on the charts. Which one was that, Richard? Do you remember that?
That was the single for singles.
Okay.
It was number 3 on the singles charts with the song Oak Tree.
Right.
And it was also in the top 10 or top 20 with the song Color of Success as a single. So the album was, for a 6-song album, to have 2 songs in the top 10 or top 20 is actually quite amazing back then.
Right.
And it was a unique kind of album experience for me because I had primarily been doing heavy rock bands. And then along comes this. They liked the sounds I was getting. They chose me to be the engineer for the entire album. And I brought in some of my friends to play parts that I thought that they could play better than Morris Day is basically a one-man band. He sang, he wrote, he could do the drum programming and played the synth. And there were certain things that I thought could actually be done better, so we had other players come in and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a list of those musicians, and before we get into the musicians list, this was right at the time when Prince was at one of his peaks. He's had several. So the sound of this record is very similar to Prince. But if you haven't heard of him and you go and listen to it, before you write it off as a Prince knockoff, I just want to repeat that they were collaborators, and they sort of developed this sound, this very distinctive sound together. I think there was some acrimony later on about who did what, but that's none of our business right now. We're just going to talk about...
This immediately followed up the famous Prince movie, Purple Rain.
Right, which had a huge impact, yeah.
Morris was like the number 2 character,
right.
And I think he wanted to show the world that he had the capabilities to be a number 1 character.
So this record was made before, of course, computers and samplers. I mean, sampling might have been around for a bit, but it was very rare. And it was recorded to tape, which is
2-inch 24-track
2-inch 24-inch analog tape, which is not really done these days, especially with this kind of music, the kind of R&B and hip-hop and dance related.
Yeah.
Richard, let me just read off some of these musicians that you talked about and see what you remember about this, because these days, as Derek and us were talking about, with an Akai MPC 3000 or whatever number unit you have, you can come in and do it all yourself. But here, this was done with people like, it has Morris Day as drums and percussion, and then it has Steve Mitchell as drum programming. Explain to the listener what a drum programmer does.
A drum programmer would program what they used for this album, and I have the actual drum machine used was a Oberheim DMX, and it was the drum machine of the time. It has removable cards in it that you can program with, alternate tom-tom sounds or alternate kick or clap sounds or alternate snare sounds. And Steve was one of the programmers. Now, Morris was also a major programmer. I don't know why he wasn't listed in the credits as a drum programmer, but he certainly was. And the way the album was pieced together was on day one of any given song, and we basically did it a song at a time. Rather than most albums nowadays, you'd come in and you'd record the basic tracks for the whole album, then you'd do the guitar overdubs for the whole album, then you'd do the various bits and pieces, maybe some synths for the whole album, and then you'd start doing the vocals for the whole album. This was basically done one song at a time in the tradition of the early Prince albums, which had only 6 songs on them. So there were 6 fairly long songs to comprise an album. And the way it was done is they'd come in with this Oberheim DMX and lay down the drums, kick, snare, hat, toms, and then they would do the overdubs. Usually the bass would come next, and sometimes Morris would play the bass himself. But in some cases, it came down to where I thought we could get a better bass sound with somebody like Larry Dunn from Earth, Wind and Fire, and he was a good friend and had done a number of albums at Indigo, and I had him come in with his Moog and play the incredible bass parts that you'll hear throughout the album, and then we would have other people come in and play various parts. I know Tony Berg, my good friend from the very first album that I did with Michael Pinder. Tony Berg was the guitar player on that album. Tony later ended up being the head of A&R for Geffen. But to me, he's still one of the all-time great guitar players, and he came in and played some of the incredible guitar licks that you hear throughout this album.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's pause for a second here, because that means that this record had no sequencing. Just a drum track was recorded.
The sequencing was the drum track.
Right, was recorded to tape, and then everything else was played over it live.
And Morris would play most of the synth parts, and almost entirely on a Yamaha DX7 synthesizer, which was the first of the FM synthesizers, frequency modulation synthesizers. He had an incredible program of sounds that he made up, and some of the best DX7 sounds I've ever heard. Morris he had that instrument down cold. He could get what he needed, and he'd come in and lay down the finishing parts, and then they'd do some vocals and guitars. And as the song would approach its finish, it seemed like there was always one day near the end of each song where Morris would call up and he'd say, okay, well, today we're going to do synth. And he'd come in, and I thought, oh, gee, I thought the synths were pretty well under control. I don't know where he's going to put it. The verses are done, the choruses are done, the bridge is done, the outro is done. And he would come in and lay down and just do one blonk, with the wiggle stick, and modulation control.
Yeah, the job.
And that would be it for the day. He would have added the cherry on top, and with a big smile, he'd say, okay, we're done for the day. This song is finished.
That's great.
I remember another time he came in and he says, okay, we're going to add some vocals, so be ready, with the vocal setup. And he came in and he says, "Okay, play the song." And he went out into the vocal booth, and I'm listening, and the verse goes by. He's already got it down. Chorus goes by. He's already got that down. The bridge comes up, and I'm still in record, and there's nothing happening. And he goes, "Huh!" And he walks out of the vocal booth.
Done.
And he says, "This song's done."
Wow.
What?
Because that was in his mind, he had listened to it a million times, and there was a place that needed a huh.
Yeah,
And that was
James Brown.
the finish of it.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that it was, cutting edge electronica, but it was all performed live, and it was cut to analog tape. So when he brought in, say, the Oberheim, the DMX that you showed, and the DX7 and other keyboards, let's just talk a bit about that. Was brought into your console via stereo, right? And
done
then
through a Dean Jensen direct box,
Okay.
transformered direct box, not an active direct box.
Made by Dean Jensen.
Made personally for us. Dean Jensen, in the early days, was actually Indigo Ranch's maintenance guy, which he didn't like the world to know. He didn't even like the world to know that he was adept at soldering, but he kept Indigo running in those first few years, and then Bart Johnson and Jerry Jensen from Capitol.
Mhm.
But Dean made for us a lot of transformer matching devices that would match up things that when you plugged them in through a regular direct box, they'd sound thin and hollow. I mean, everybody's tried to record a guitar with a direct box and thought, nah, this really isn't it. But Dean would have made for me a direct box that was specifically matched to a humbucker pickup.
No kidding.
And it would sound enormous and huge instead of thin and plunky. He made another direct box where, I mean, we went into his transformer factory on a Sunday afternoon when everybody had gone home, and we hand wound a transformer for a Strat single coil.
Wow.
And you just couldn't hear those sounds anywhere else. They were one-of-a-kind things. So I had a lot of transformer matching things, especially for the synths.
Right.
And that's how we were able to get, if you listen to this album, some of the synth sounds are just huge and amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the whole thing. So you take, for example, the DMX. It has, 8 outputs?
Mm-hmm.
So you would put that in 1 through 8 into the console, or would you put those through DIs too?
Those would go through direct boxes, Jensen transformer direct boxes, and into the console.
What is your? I'm just trying to put together in my head, because I've never recorded like any sort of electronic drums. What was your approach coming from the old school acoustic drums to bringing in electric drums with like gates and everything? Like, what was your? Because you wouldn't really need them, or
most of the sounds. I had a bunch of DMX cards, which are sort of like a triangular card that would fit into the edge connector inside of a DMX. And I had about a half a dozen snare cards and a half a dozen tom cards and several kick cards. And we were able to change up sounds to get really fantastic drum sounds. And then, of course, I would do the typical kind of EQing that I would do for a live drum sound, so that we would get a hollowed out kick sound with a lot of extra bottom, a lot of extra twack up at the top, and some of the middle carved out, so that there was room for the synths and the bass and the vocals and stuff like that without taking up too much room in the drums, but still sounding huge.
Right. Nice. All right. Well,
there was very little gating or compression or anything like that, because that would already be done
in the signal,
in the chip that was on the card that would fit into the Oberheim DMX.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, other than the drum programming in the sense, there were also, you mentioned Tony Berg, who played guitar on this, but there was also some musicians named Horace Bokeh Coleman Jr. Do you remember him?
Mm-hmm.
Howie Rice.
Howie Rice, oh yeah.
And Roland Bautista.
Roland Batista. Roland was my favorite guitar player through the 80s. Tony Berg easily could have been, but he got to be kind of inaccessible for use as a session man. Roland was the guitar player with Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Nice.
He was the guy that did the solos with the guitar behind his head and with his teeth and stuff like that. And in addition to that kind of showmanship, Roland got some of the best guitar tones I've ever heard, and he added those to this album, including his early use of the guitar synthesizer. He had one of the early Roland guitar synthesizers, and he was the only guy that I ever heard who could actually get it to work right for him. And
I heard that used extensively on Flock of Seagulls. That guitarist had the Roland synth, which a friend of ours was the drummer in the Flock of Seagulls. He currently owns a studio in Santa Monica. And we have an interview with him on our YouTube channel.
Right.
His name is Michael Marquardt. His son's a musician as well, great guy. But he played with Flock of Seagulls, and that guy used the guitar synth. So those were the guitarists as mentioned on the Wikipedia. We also have mixing by Michael Brower and Morris Day.
The mixing was done after I was done recording the songs, although I did do roughs. Actually, they were better than roughs on all the songs, and I may be wrong, but it sure sounded to me like some of them got used without crediting me, because I still have copies of the original mixes that I did, and I swear, unless somebody really did a close approximation of what I had done, they ended up actually being album cuts. Now, I'm not saying that somebody couldn't have copied my mixes. It's possible. And then there were some songs that were distinctly different than my versions of them. So I'm not sure how it ended up. I didn't get credited as mixing any of it. That's fine with me. I don't need credits. But I definitely did record the album top to bottom.
I was going to say, if other people are taking credit for your work, I would like to take credit for a few albums if you don't mind. I'll send you a list afterwards.
Yeah.
We all would.
I did all
start
the
telling
work.
people I did these albums. Sure, I was 6 when I did them, but what can I say?
Well,
I
don't want to piss anybody off if they did do really good imitations of the mixes I had done. But in my heart, I can hear some moves that I think that I did.
Well, it wouldn't be unusual.
It wouldn't. And it's okay. They did what they needed to do to get a hit album, and they got a hit album. Morris was a talent to be reckoned with. Right. He would, and for a guy to come into the studio and just add a huh to a record and say, that's the finishing touch. And he knew that he had a hit song under his belt after he did that. And the song would have been lacking without it. It was just genius how he would finish off a song. Those last hour before we would move on to another song, some amazing stuff would happen.
Well, he's credited as the producer for this as well. So
yes, he was. Although I can remember taking rough mixes over to his house. He had rented a house in Malibu, um, near the Malibu Castle, um, up just up Las Virgenes. And I remember taking songs over there, and not too surprisingly, because he brought her to the studio a couple times, he shared the house with his mom. He was a loving son, a good man, and had a stable of lovely women that occasionally would pray through the studio, and he would like, well, we're done for the day.
I bet.
And you know, but his mom was just a sweetheart of a woman, and she would oftentimes, I think, add her own 2 cents as to what she thought about a song.
Yeah, he's listed in most of these credits. Greg Fillinganes was the piano. Howie Rice, Larry Dunn, Morris Day, Ricky Free Smith, and Steve Mitchell on synth.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Larry Dunn with the Olivia Newton-John record, didn't we?
Yeah, Larry Dunn did a lot of albums up at Indigo,
Okay.
both as producer and as a player. He was one of the major forces as a producer of jazz records, and he did probably 24 major jazz albums at Indigo, largely working with Chris Brunt as his engineer.
Yeah.
And then Larry Dunn later went on to, nowadays he's got what's called the Larry Dunn Orchestra, and he's got a couple albums out where he does basically everything. And he and his wife sing on them, and they're good friends to this day. Larry is just an amazing player, and largely old analog synth stuff. He's got one of the only working OB1 Oberheim synths, old 8-voice that had separate modules
with the huge patch panel,
modules for each, with a keyboard controller. Larry is one of the few people in the world who still knows how to operate that stuff and still knows how to get the amazing sounds out of it. My wife and I went to a Larry Dunn concert of Larry Dunn Orchestra a couple years back, and on stage, sure enough, he had those vintage synths.
Well, Derek, you're the youngest of the troupe here. What do you think about that kind of sound from the 80s? Is it relevant? Is it, dated? Is it, because at the time it was cutting edge.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course it's dated, at this point. But
sure, has to be.
When I hear a lot of synths and electronic drums and stuff, not like modern stuff, but like in that style, I definitely remember my childhood, because you could turn on any movie or anything always had that type of, that genre going. Very popular then. Yeah, no, it puts me in a place. It definitely brings me back to my childhood a little bit. But even Morris Day himself, I remember watching a Richard Pryor movie called Moving. Do you remember that one?
Sure.
He's and Dana Carvey's in it, and Morris Day's in it. But Morris Day's like sitting there in like his crushed velvet suit and his hanky and stuff, and I'm like, I remember as a kid, like, what's that guy's problem, And now, over the years, becoming a huge fan of music in general, I was like, oh, it's Morris Day, I get it now. So,
that was his image, that he was
kind of like Prince,
the ultimate ladies' man, and dressed the part, and walked the walk, and talked the talk, and played the music.
And there's, I'm sure they still perform. The Time still performs occasionally, since he got back with them some years ago. And I think there's still a crowd for it. It's not mainstream. It's not Lady Gaga or whoever. But yeah.
No, I mean we talked about it. This is our 14th podcast, and we talked about it on the previous podcast with Lenny Kravitz, how he he went for a retro sound, and in some ways it hasn't dated him because his sound harkens back to a time before, like Lenny Kravitz. That album was 1989. That was 4 years after this record.
This
so
one, yeah,
the
quite a
same
difference.
same.
Let me throw a comment in here.
Sure, go ahead.
Having worked with some of the heaviest bands of the 21st century, and having gold and platinum albums hanging on the walls from those bands. What do you think these guys play when they're sitting around in the band room or something like that? They're playing classic rock and Buddy Holly
stuff
and
stuff that
old songs because they like those old Everly Brothers and they play those old songs on guitar and sing along with them and stuff like that. You'll hear guys that you wouldn't think would even know how to play that stuff. That's what they play when they're just sitting around kicking shit.
Yeah, well,
I'd be interested to see Jonathan Davis.
You think dated? Well, he'd add his own touch to it. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
No, it's
just like he did with the War remake.
Oh yeah.
I mean.
Well, I was just gonna say, it would be funny to see Jonathan Davis from Korn sitting down and playing like Rocket Man or something, on piano, and you're like, what?
listening to Morris Day.
What's happening now?
Unlikely.
Hold on.
Unlikely. Well,
unlikely.
I didn't mean to be cruel about it being dated. It's the technology that does it. It's the technology that dates it, and nowadays it's all kind of becoming interspersed. A lot of artists are now going back to 80s sounds, and because they're young and up and coming, their current peer groups, like, I'd never heard that before. Well,
you're right.
I'd heard it before because it was Morris Day 25 years ago, and
the Naked and Famous.
That's what's so interesting about it,
some of the more end of my career bands that I worked with knew more about vintage music and classic rock than us oldsters. They knew every song, they knew every riff, they had it analyzed, they knew songs from and you mentioned to a kid nowadays the Beatles, and they're like, who? If it wasn't for the Grammys having saluted them this year, there'd be a lot of people who would be like, I don't know who that is, or even a band as famous as the Beatles or the Stones or Led Zeppelin or something like that. But
honestly,
that's who the actual musicians who are coming in and playing great music. They listen to this stuff.
No, you're right. And it cracks me up because when I was in middle school, I went to school with kids that not only wore Metallica shirts, but Led Zeppelin shirts and things like that. And then now, even today, I was on set last week for a commercial, and one of the young girls, she was only about 19, she's rocking a Nirvana shirt. And I'm thinking, Nirvana was out before I was old enough to really enjoy them. So it's amazing how we hold on. And it becomes like
go back.
It becomes like a property almost, and it becomes more of like a style of clothing rather than the band itself, and that always cracks me up. But I'm sure she knows a ton about Nirvana, probably more than I do,
Yeah.
And Stephen and I went back and listened to a good portion of this Color of Success album. God.
Oh yeah, I listened to it.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's
got its own energy.
Everything about it, the vocals, the arrangements, the sounds of the drums and the synths and the guitars, and just amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's got its own sound, and that's why when we prefaced this thing, it was, well, it's very similar to Prince, but those two were the forefathers of this sound, and artists like Pharrell and Beyonce, they grew up listening to Prince and Morris Day, and they've just taken it to another level, or they just reorganized it, to their own liking. And I think that's the cycle of popular music.
Well, I've never seen Morris Day, but I've seen Prince. When I worked at Warner Brothers, I worked on one of the late night talk shows. It was called Lopez Tonight,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
Prince was on there, and
Hmm.
people are just going crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I looked over to one of the audience coordinators, and I said, only Prince could really pull this off. If I was to get up there in like a gold suit on a big purple piano, people would laugh me out of the room even if I
Yeah.
had as
Yeah.
much talent as he, because
Yeah.
they have the charisma, they have, and I guess Morris Day,
I think
also.
Morris could pull it off too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There was definitely a point at which after Purple Rain where Morris proved to the world that he was every bit as much a star as anybody of that era.
sure.
Do we know what happened to him subsequently? Did he lose interest in the business?
He did another album afterwards,
I
um,
was gonna say,
Fishnet.
he's still performing, I thought.
Yeah.
And it had, I think, one hit song on it. I don't think, at least from what I've heard, that he ever musically matched The Color of Success.
Hmm.
But he did make appearances, like Derek said, in a lot of movies.
Oh yeah,
And
Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back from
Yeah,
2007 or 8. He was in it.
yeah, I think that he may have gone on to be primarily in acting, but it's like anybody, if you're a musician, it lives in your soul and never goes away.
Yeah.
Well, another thing about this, because I was
Nicely
fairly young during this whole time, and music at this time was fairly, not necessarily divisive. It probably still is, but this genre um, had not necessarily crossed over to the huge amount of, like right now, all of your top artists are basically derivatives of this genre. Lady Gaga, kind of the pop, hip hop. Lady
Definitely.
Gaga, Beyonce, Kanye West. He's a rapper, but it's all coming from this. Where in the '80s there was kind of a battle. This was '85, so you had hair metal bands like
And Pat
Motley
Benatar.
Crue. You had Motley Crue, and you had Poison, and you had the Scorpions, and they were dominating the charts. Motley Crue had number ones, and then you had U2 in the mid '80s and REM, and they were dominating the charts. And
then you had bands that were like MIDI programmed dance music,
right.
and stuff like that. And
Right.
this was, I think, one of the albums that crossed over from the dance music
Mhm.
Mhm.
into the mainstream,
Mhm.
and was just undeniably good music.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people look at a lot of that programmed dance music, 80s music, as being, kind of the dredges of music
Mhm.
of that time. And I'm not going to say that, because as with every form of music, there's good music and
Right.
bad music. There's good opera, there's bad opera, there's good classical, there's bad classical, there's good classic rock, there's bad classic rock, there's good heavy metal, there's bad heavy metal,
Yeah, and
and this was this was the good stuff,
Mhm.
yeah, and good music
which is why it crossed over on the Billboard charts for an album of this type in the mid '80s to be worldwide number 37. Means that it had crossed over a lot.
Yeah. That's my whole point, is that the crossover process, obviously from the '50s and '60s with groups like the Supremes and all that, it's always been happening. But the '80s was kind of particularly divisive. I mean, the Motley Crue fan might have publicly said
Yep.
Morris Day is the worst thing ever, and then
Right.
go and listen
Right.
to it by themselves at home. But publicly, they were like, "That stuff is awful,"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these days, that doesn't really. I mean, maybe you're a heavy metal guys are still like everything except metal sucks. But
Right.
these days, it's kind of it's come together even more, which is a nice thing, quite frankly. I mean, we were talking about an artist that Richard recorded called Limp Bizkit, and you know, that whole genre came from, if you ask me, it came from when Aerosmith decided to get together with Run DMC in the 80s and do Walk This Way. You know, where you had a rap hip hop artist getting together with a rock artist and coming together, it's a great result of that kind of.
I'm thinking more Anthrax meets Public Enemy.
Well, yeah,
Killer Bees album.
Yeah.
Just people
Bring the Noise. They did Bring the Noise.
Yeah, and like these people would go to see Anthrax, and you could just see that look on their face, like, what's going on here? Like, I'm here to beat some people up in a mosh pit, you know, and like, who's this guy? Like,
yeah.
Public Enemy.
You know, and I saw
Flavor Flav
bands come in and using programmed drums. You know, later on it became the Akai and the emulator, Emu made by Apple. And in earlier instances, it was the Oberheim and the Yamaha drum machine and stuff like that. But these are the pioneers that are still alive today in many songs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. It's. I
mean, I saw heavy metal bands that I recorded. I'm not going to mention who at this point, but I saw heavy metal bands come in with an Oberheim DMX and lay down a track, and then lay down a track with a live drummer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the only thing you can count on is change, and these guys. I mean, I'd be interested to hear where Morris Day, got his influences from to create a sound like this. That was very unusual for its time.
I think he and Prince were, didn't you say they were childhood buddies?
Yeah, that's what I read.
Or something like that. And I think they spent a lot of time together developing these sounds and this style and this music overall.
Here's a picture of that 303 you have right there, still in beautiful condition.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I got a picture of it when we were over there last, and I was just like, that is such a fantastic.
That's the Roland bass box.
Yeah.
It's such a fantastic.
And people still looking for those and using them, and the reissue doesn't sound the same.
Yeah, no, that's what I've heard.
We had Guitar Center corporate come over to look at some of this equipment, and I was over here. I was over at Richard's setting it up, and I remember that 303, and he's like, "Do you think they're going to want to see that?" I go, "Oh yeah."
Oh yeah.
So I specifically put that on the bed, and when the president of like the gear acquisition group for Guitar Center came in, he's like, "Oh, you have a 303." He went. He jumped. It was like beeline straight to the 303 to look at it because it was so pivotal in that sound.
It was.
And at some point, we're going to probably put some of this gear up for sale.
Yeah.
Maybe even as one huge lot, or who knows? But as I get into more and more thinking that I have finally retired and I'm not going to let anybody drag me out. I did let Bing Crosby drag me out of retirement.
You dragged me with you on that one.
Yeah.
How many tracks did you guys do for the family?
We did 160 previously unreleased songs.
Yeah, songs. But they were from radio shows. So.
Wow.
But some of them are just amazing.
Yeah.
And then I went on and did a bunch of songs and skits and acts of Bing's from even earlier era, from late 40s and early 50s. And there's, my God, these guys could play.
Yeah.
Well, talk about, we talked about the progress of
Maybe we'll do a podcast on that at some point.
Sure.
Yeah.
We talk about the process of Morris Day recording to tape and performing it live, and then of course now more modern recording, you might not even have to do that. But if you go even further back to Bing Crosby, the whole band was in one room with a microphone, recorded the one song in one go, and that was what was on the radio, and no overdubs, no,
No rooms for
not
mistakes.
not even individual miking. You
Yeah.
know, it's literally just like, here's the mic in the room, do your worst.
Well,
And
sometimes they had a few mics
right,
uh, that,
but not in a modern sense
but
of,
in those days,
yeah,
there was a theory that you couldn't have a mixer with, if you had more than a few channels, the noise got so tremendous that it was unusable
Hmm.
in the days before active combine amps, when it was all passive combining, and you could only have a few mics. Most of the, you think of mixing a song, the way they mixed on some of those early songs was how far you were from the microphone. You know,
distance. So
that controlled the mix.
so that's very different from what we're even talking about with Morris Day, and then of course with modern recording. But I just wanted to kind of, you know, the
We
thing
were
that,
we were into being able to use some rather spectacular echo sounds with Morris. I'd say that was, out of all the effects that we had, we used a lot of EMT 250, a lot of EMT uh, plate echo sounds, and distinctly different ones for each one. There's only really one pedal that I think of as having been on this album a lot, and that's the Resley, which I've mentioned on several albums just because we used it so much. And this was made by Shinai, and it says Resley Tone RT18. And what they really meant was Leslie, but in translating it through the Oriental, the L became an R, and it is a Resley. And a lot of the vibrato-ish sounds that you'll hear on this album were run through the Resley RT18.
nice,
And other than that, most of the sounds were just raw sounds,
yeah,
derived on the synth, or with my creative effects were primarily echo, and we did use a lot of echo, and a lot of it went to tape.
You really can't find much on that pedal at all. I've looked before, but I found there's one video on YouTube right now. It's the Shinai Resley Tone RT18 test, and I believe it looks like someone's playing it through a Fender Super Champ with a Fender Strat. It says, but I'm not going to play it for here because it's not our property. But I was just going to say, if anybody's interested, it's Shinai, which is SHIN -EI. Resley.
That was a Japanese pedal maker. They had some. I still have a few really great pedals. They made a wah pedal. They made a distortion pedal, but this Resley was such a unique one. Everybody wanted to use it.
And used on the Morris Day record.
Yep.
Well,
absolutely.
Any other thoughts about this record?
It goes down in history as a pivotal song, pivotal album in changing changing music. This was a song that changed the face of music. Color of Success, and the whole album, really.
Was this a gold or platinum record for you?
It was gold. I have a gold, I believe. In fact, it's the one sitting right up there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That's presented to me for 500,000 sales, which is gold.
Yep,
Right.
nice.
And
very nice.
In the 80s, that's
I don't
very
know.
good.
It may very well have gone beyond gold, but that was the last one they gave me. Because I know they've reissued the album over the years. I think it was reissued as a CD. It was reissued as a cassette, and so forth. I thought I had the paperwork for that, but there were several re-releases of it over the years, So that album lives on, and I think it was re-released in digital form as recently as 3 or 4 years ago.
And for anybody who's watching this or listening to this, a fun thing to do if you're into gold and platinum records like we are is you can go on to riaa.com, and from the main website, there's a link that says it'll say gold and platinum, and you can literally click on that, go into the search bar, and type in any artist or any album, hit search, and it will display when it was released, when it went gold, when it went platinum, and so on and so forth. So I'm always doing that, just for fun, searching people, looking things up. So that's perfect.
That's a fun thing about Indigo Ranch, and if you're an engineer or up and coming engineer or producer or anything, is that engineers are inclined, due to necessity, to record multiple genres. And so,
of course,
if you go back through our podcast, we talk about Korn and Limp Bizkit and
Neil Young.
And now we're talking about more of the rap, hip hop. This isn't rap, but hip hop with Morris Day. But if you go back through Richard's client list, he also started LL Cool J's career. He was one of the first people to record LL Cool J as well. So it's multiple genres. And
LL Cool J is Ladies Love Cool.
I didn't actually know
Cool J. Yeah,
I didn't know that till later. But there was completely different genre to Megadeth, which is another great artist.
Crossover there.
Yeah, but they were all Wasp, Machine Head. They were all recorded out there at Indigo Ranch, and Morris Day's another one, and of course a lot of jazz, et cetera, et cetera. But
and we tried to provide for each artist what was really necessary for their music, rather than having one set formula. And I think that was part of the versatility of Indigo Ranch and the team that we had up there, is that we could cater to the needs of the record rather than trying to thumbprint everything or with our sound. We were able to switch styles and genres and records, and even for the same artist, be able to get a completely different sounding album if they wanted it.
Yeah, and a lot of times you say, oh, if I could be like a fly on the wall during that rehearsal or during that recording or during that anything event. And it's really nice with this podcast is you're kind of opening that up to everybody, because so many of us would have been like, man, what was it like to be like at any level, because we all have our heroes. I don't care who you are. Everyone has their heroes. And sometimes you just want to know, what was it like? What were they like? Are they cool? What did they bring in? What was the traditions? And I mean, you've really touched spot on with a lot of that for us. So it's been really cool so far. I'm interested to see where we'll go next.
It was a privilege and an honor to work with a lot of these artists.
No kidding. Yeah.
And like we said, there were guest artists on this album that were as amazing as Morris himself, and they put their heart and soul into making this album what it was as much as anybody, because they, being part of the stable of musicians that I would call on, would come in and add what was necessary to the album instead of fingerprinting it with their style of music.
Well, we've talked about on some of the previous podcasts, and we'll mention it now, the idea of a listening service sponsored by us, in which you, the musician, the singer, the rapper, the band member with a band, whatever language, you can have your music submitted to Richard for consideration. And I'd like to just kind of touch on that with quote-unquote famous artists that you've recorded. What did you find in common with all of them that were famous? What was the kind of thread amongst all of them that might have been what helped bring them to that level?
I would say each of them had a unique piece of the puzzle that we now call music.
Nice.
And that there the great artists weren't copying somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't trying to, well, let's jump in on the heavy metal sound because our favorite band is such and such, and they recorded out at Indigo. So let's try and get their sound and everybody will like it. Those aren't the albums you hear about. We did have a few of those come through, and we, were obligated to work on them. But it was the bands that came through that had their own unique thing to add to the history of music that really made the great albums. And when I review things for other bands, I'm not reviewing it because I want to ownership of somebody's song or to even produce or engineer or even work on the song. I do it so that I give my honest opinion of what do you got here? Do you have a hit song or have I heard this song 300 times in 6 different versions?
Yeah, seriously.
And you do a great version of it, but somehow or another, there's something magic that happens in a hit album and in a hit song, and that's what I look for as I look through. When people ask me to listen to their music, I'm looking to see if they have that magic, that thing that people want to play it over and over and over again. Because all these hit albums are things that when people would buy this album, they would play it over and over and over again because you just couldn't get enough of it. And that's what makes a hit album or a hit song or a hit artist.
And I'm really glad I didn't miss that window. I still bought albums. Like, I still bought CDs.
Right.
Like, I think about my nephews and nieces. They don't have to do that. They just, I send them iTunes gift cards, and they go and they buy the songs. Because I don't encourage any illegal downloading. I never have. So I send them gift cards, and they buy their songs. And there's just nothing like, waiting for that album to come out, and going to the store, buying that CD, cracking it open. Even if your buddy's got one, you're like, boom, put it in the car. It was just, there was a lot of magic. There's a lot of magic.
Mm-hmm. And there was there was more than just the record. There was the artwork, and there was the, all of that's in the little stories that were inside, and the liner notes, and the, wanting to get that record so you could see who played on the album and what special thanks there were and why and what, and that was kind of the magic of records back in our day that I think is almost entirely lost in downloading.
Yeah. Well, and plus when my buddies signed to Geffen and I saw my name in their liner notes at age like 19 or whatever, I remember how cool that was. Like, how many of you in my hometown, So it is. It creates a whole. It creates a whole.
No, it like I said earlier, the only thing you can count on is change, and I agree that experience is great. Hopefully, the younger audience has a new experience that's great, and I don't know how, whatever it is, but maybe it's the fact that you can have 5,000 songs on a unit the size of your palm, is what's great. But the whole idea of what is that special bit? Part of this whole listening service that we're going to be launching is you will get your music into the hands of the same people, or in this case with Richard, because we're talking with others about joining us.
Oh yeah, some people up there that are absolutely too. Just
same level as Richard, and you'll get it into his hands. Same person that recorded Morris Day and LL Cool J and Korn and Limp Bizkit. He'll listen to your stuff and
Neil Young
and see what you think. Barbra Streisand and the list goes on and on.
Right behind me there's the Moody Blues, my original partners.
Right. And we're really excited about that because, as Derek mentioned, if you're in a small town, and you don't have access to the A&R people in LA, New York, or Nashville, here's a chance to at least have somebody listen to it and tell you how he can improve it. because it might not be what you know.
And I'm not the last word on things.
No,
I may hate a song, and I'll, if I do, I'll tell you, and it may end up being the next #1 song in the world.
Right.
But I do have historically a pretty good sense of the hundreds of albums that I worked on, of knowing which was going to be the single, which was going to be the song that people played over and over and over again, and having a keen sense of, is this a hit record, or is this a bunch of B-sides?
Right.
And B-sides. And B-sides can be really good, but they may just be good imitations of something that we've already heard.
Right.
And that's why they never make it past that B-side. It may be the best copy of some great artist's rendition of something, transformed into another artist's brand new song, but it still has, it's like, see, I remember where I heard that kind of thing, and it's already been done.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you listen to something and you just can't get it out of your head.
Right.
You're right.
No, exactly.
The only thing I know is what I like.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what makes a producer or an engineer, is being able to say, I like that.
Well,
sometimes a 6-year-old kid would be better at it.
We live by the rule of 3.
Yeah, 3 criteria.
What everything would be reviewed by.
Yeah, it would be production, performance, and songwriting.
Right, composition.
So your song might be fantastic, and you're like, why does it sound terrible? Well, fortunately, if you send it to us and we get a hold of it, and Richard gives it a listen, he can say, well, your EQing scheme is not what I would say is ideal, or you've overcompressed it, or you're using coloring with effects too much reverb or whatever. And like we said, it's just opinion, but it's a valid opinion because it's got a history of success.
Or this song is 4 choruses too long.
Right.
Or you need to, the lyrics really, we've all heard certain lyrics that have been done over and over and over, and it's time to not be sitting in the garage with the girlfriend with the door closed. There's new lyrics just waiting to be explored.
It's basically, the service developed between the 3 of us is basically it's an opportunity that Stephen and I would have liked to have growing up in a small town.
Yeah.
That connecting with someone on Richard's status and some of our other friends that are A&R and producers and have worked on the biggest albums, the biggest songs right now on the radio, connecting artists like that, which we were once, to these people. And I think that's the biggest thing, is creating a bridge between artists and getting it out there. It's the biggest thing. How can we help people take it from this level to this level? We can make it happen by taking it through Richard or some of our other guests, which we'll announce once they're available. But
we've got peers that are currently or not. We're not going to name any names, but have been working with Miley Cyrus and Prince. I actually know a guy that worked with Prince, and so we're going to try and involve as many people as we can. You will have to pay for the service. Because it's about using people's time, and just like anybody, by the hour you have to charge, and so it will be a pay-for service, but you will get the song listened to thoroughly and by the ears of the person.
Professionals, yeah,
not just we'll hand it to our buddy and they can make it, and. We exactly as Derek said, this is something that we would have loved to have had when we were younger. And
Stephen and I are not going to be the ones that
No.
are reviewing the music. We are.
I mean,
simply...
Richard will probably. The idea is that you'll submit a track, and Derek and I will listen to it, and then give it to Richard. Richard will listen to it, and then we'll discuss it as a group. And then what we'll do is put together Richard's notes and send it back to you with the response. And
you no longer have to be a legend in your own garage.
No, exactly.
I'm still a legend in my own apartment.
Yeah.
But we talk about it on previous podcasts because we're really excited about putting this out there. We're just finishing up the logistics of it so that it's a easy and fun process for you, the listener. That in mind, the way that you can contact about this process with us would be initially through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Studio Rat HQ. Just send us a message, and we'll respond to that. But we have several outlets that you can listen to this podcast and view it. We have our own YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Studio Rat HQ. And we also have a website, which is currently being revamped, but still has content available for you. And that is StudioRatHQ.com. One word.
Now, Studio Rat is one word. StudioRatHQ.com.
Exactly. And right now, what you can do on that is you can find out
spaces.
A little bit about Richard's history, some pieces of the equipment that he had throughout his career, and all of our podcasts are available for download in audio format on that page. We're also on iTunes via 3 separate words, Studio Rat HQ. But so you have multiple ways to get this content if you're interested in how records are made and how records are made out at Indigo Ranch. So with that in mind, I'd like to say, as always, it's an honor to do this with you guys.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
I'm Stephen Couch here with Richard Kaplan and Derek Jablonski. Same rat time, same rat channel, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye.